Hey leaders, it's Tim. Thanks for checking out this video. This is our first of many training videos we'll be doing this 2012-2013 school year. And unfortunately, we're starting off on kind of a quite a serious note. We're going to be talking about how to deal with crisis situations. I usually wait a little bit longer or further into the year to talk about this. But you probably are aware that just a couple days ago, or just yesterday as I'm making this video, there was a student at a local high school who died an untimely death as it was described in the press release. There's still a lot of questions about what the cause was, but whether it was an accident or it was a suicide, we're dealing with certainly a crisis situation. So I want to talk about what are the crisis situations, how to handle it, how to interact with parents, students, and even for our own selves, our own souls, how do we deal with that, how do we think through those issues and those challenges. So if you're watching the video, you'll notice that I'll be looking down to my notes every once in a while to just refer to them. And then if you're listening to the audio, I have another device recording the audio here. You probably won't notice anything, but I just want to let the video watchers know that. So first, let's talk about the key situations that you're likely to bump into if you're going to face a crisis situation with students. You're talking about things like suicide, eating disorders, cutting, bullying, divorce, sexual abuse or sexual assault, and then substance abuse. Now, within those categories, there are certain ones that require immediate action, and we'll talk about those types of situations. And we're talking about, within 5-10 minutes, we need to contact the police, or you'll contact me, or contact a parent. And then there are other ones that require direct action, but maybe not just, in the next 5 minutes, but, within 24 hours. So we'll break that down and talk about that a little bit. What I'm going to do is work through some of the key issues that are connected to each one of those topics, and just give us kind of a heads up of things to be looking for, or key factors we want to identify to be aware of possible upcoming crisis situations. And by that I mean this. When it comes to the issue of suicide, what are the factors that would make me think, as I'm interacting with a student, hey, this student might have some challenges emotionally that would press him or her to be thinking about suicide? So certainly depression. A student who is dealing with clinical depression or looks depressed, sad, lonely, doesn't want to talk, very isolated. Another key factor for suicide is giving things away. People who have made the decision to commit suicide often want to give things as gifts to others. Talk of death. If you have a student who you're interacting with and they're constantly asking questions about what happens after you die or life after death, you can generally tell if this is a morbid fascination or someone who's trying to figure out some theological truth. And the reality of these and most of these situations is that it's compounding factors. You have many things that are kind of piling on top of one another that lead you to believe that there may be a bigger issue. Self-isolation. Maybe the student is pretty social or has some pretty good friends, and then all of a sudden they pull back and they stop hanging out with friends, or they stop coming to youth group or Sundays or other things that they're usually coming to. So that's another factor. Hopelessness is definitely one of those. As you interact with a student and you hear them share, I don't think things will ever get better, I'm doing really poorly in a class, I don't know if things will ever change, I don't have any friends, I'll never have friends. That general sense of hopelessness should be something that sparks our awareness. And then lastly, this is kind of an obvious one, but it does happen, actual plans. Hearing about a student saying, I'm planning on doing something that's going to harm myself. Now you might think that a person who wants to commit suicide would say, no, I'm not going to tell anybody, it's going to be a total shock, but oftentimes people actually do reveal their plans. We'll talk about some action steps that kind of overlap a lot of these different crisis situations. So let me work through the different categories that I mentioned earlier, and then we'll move on to kind of what are the action steps that you need to take. So eating disorders. Crisis situation, absolutely. This can be a very serious health threat to people. Things to be aware of, weight loss. You see a student who has had a significant amount of weight loss over a short amount of time. Obsession with food, somebody who's always talking about food, talking about calories, talking about how they don't eat or how they do eat or what they did eat. That should spark some thoughts in us to ask some questions in our own mind. Are there factors that would lead us to believe the student might have an eating disorder? Nervousness around food. If a student is nervous around food or seems to be kind of paranoid, that could be a sign of an eating disorder. Stained teeth. That is usually a sign of bulimia, and so that's just something you can note. If you see a student that has stained teeth, usually a yellowish tinge, that might be a sign of someone with an eating disorder. Overly loose clothing. So a student who is wearing really, really baggy clothing, and not just kind of style within the styles baggy, but overly emphasizing how loose the clothing is so you can't see the form of that person's body. Obsessive exercise, a student who's always working out. I go to the gym 3 hours a day in the morning and 3 hours a day at night. They say things like that. Probably should be aware of what's happening internally with them. It could be an eating disorder. Pale skin, and then another one is trips to the bathroom often, particularly for bulimia. Obviously, students will eat food and then go and purge, vomiting out the food to make themselves feel better emotionally and otherwise. So if you see a student who's regularly taking trips to the bathroom, be aware of that. The issue of cutting, let's talk about cutting. Some of the identifying factors, obviously cuts. These can be all over the body. You'll see it on the wrist, on the arms. You can see it on the thighs, on the legs. It can be hidden anywhere on the body. So if a student, bends over and their shirt comes up a little bit, you can see cuts on their back. That might be a sign of cutting. It's generally not a cut looks that you would look like if you got a scratch from, say, a thorn bush. It looks much more intentional, straight line, and there's scarring that usually comes from the cutting, so be aware of that. Connected to the scarring, just take note that scars, when they heal, itch. And so if you see a student who has long sleeve clothing on, or just in general is itching themselves, that student's itching him or herself a lot, could be a sign that there are some scars that are healing and that's irritating the student. Some other things, long sleeve shirts in warm weather, or excessive clothing to kind of cover up where the cutting could actually be seen by an adult or by somebody else. Interest in sharp objects. A student likes to talk about or likes to get a hold of knives, razors, things like that. Now, there are a lot of factors that influence people to be involved in any of these significant kind of alarming behaviors, crisis situations. One thing I will say is that for cutting, some people think it's just a totally insane thing to do. But for students, this is often a release and a way to escape from their troubles. Now, suicide is obviously a similar type of thing. It's a way that people think they can escape from their troubles, and an eating disorder as well is escape from troubles. Most of these issues, those three, are connected to issues of control. So if I am lacking control in a certain area of my life, at least I can control what I'm eating or how I'm touching cutting my skin or harming myself. And obviously suicide is the sense of total lack of control, and the only thing I can control is my existence. So those are some factors to be aware of. Two other areas. We're going to talk about bullying. For bullying, some of the identifying factors: fear, in general, kids who are fearful, kids who stay away from other kids. There are certainly kids who've been bullied by other kids who are in the youth group. It's just the reality of what it's like to be a kid today. So if you see one kid who's always staying away from another kid, that might be something to be aware of. Hanging out with only adults, that's a place where a student will feel safe, and so they'll avoid being with kids. Or on the other side, acting out against or around smaller students. So if I'm a 7th grader and I start picking on a 6th grader, or I'm a 10th grader and start picking on the smaller 8th graders, that could be a sign that that's me taking out my frustration on somebody who's been picking on me. The last two areas, sexual assault or sexual abuse, and then we'll talk about drug abuse. For sexual assault, we're talking about if it's happening in the home, it could generally be a fear of going home. It can also be there's two responses sometimes when it comes to an adult at home who is abusing a child. It can be great fear of the parent or the adult, or also an over amplification of how great that adult is. And it's almost this justification in a person's mind of this person's really a good person. Maybe they just had a bad day and that's why they took this out on me. So those are things to be aware of. Great interest in the opposite sex or the same sex. Students who have gone through sexual assault or sexual abuse often have their perceptions of sexuality so impacted that they overreact by being really attracted to men or really attracted to women, constantly touching and hugging and sitting on laps and things like that. So something to be aware of. Also, on the other side is that if a student has been sexually abused, any type of physical contact with that student can cause great alarm. So you pat a student on the back and say, "Hey, it's good to see you," and they kind of shudder or move away or duck away. That could be a sign that something is going on when it comes to sexual abuse and, of course, physical abuse as well. The last thing I want to talk about is just general alcohol and drug abuse. Certainly with alcohol abuse, if a student is using alcohol regularly, you can smell it on that student. You can see it in their behavior. Students who get really into consuming alcohol and or drugs will still come to youth group, or they'll go to their school dances or whatever, and they'll go and use prior and then show up to an event. So the smell of marijuana, the smell of alcohol, certainly bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, slow reaction time, those are clearly things connected to alcohol and drug abuse. Another thing to be aware of is if you hear students talking about hanging out with a lot of older people or older students, not necessarily adults like adults who work with the youth group, but I'm hanging out with this guy who's 23 or 24 who I met through work. That's something to be aware of. That could be an opportunity for people to get a hold of drugs or alcohol. Now, that's just a really quick overview. We could go into great detail on each one of those things, but what I want to talk about is the action steps. What do you do when you're facing a situation like this and you're trying to figure out, how do I handle this as a leader who's working with students in the barn? The first thing you have to be aware of, always, the top priority is the safety of you and the student. So if a student expresses something that is an immediate threat, an immediate danger, I plan on going home and harming somebody, harming myself, doing drugs, something like that. If there is an immediate threat, you should call, you don't have to do it in front of the student, but you should call 911 and let them know about that immediate threat. Then you should call parents, and you should call me. Now, the order should always be, if there's an immediate danger, to call 911 and say, hey, this student said they're going to go home and harm him or herself, or they're going to go hurt somebody and they just ran out the door. Certainly calling 911 is the best thing to do. Secondly, you want to contact parents and or myself. Now, the reason I say and or is that if a student is having a lot of trouble at home, and the parents, unfortunately, the world we live in, there's a lot of broken families. And so if you have parents who are, really aggressive or who are abusive towards their kids, to call the parents might not be the best first choice. You certainly want to call 911 to deal with the crisis in that moment if there's an immediate threat, and then calling parents or myself. Regardless, the parents will be contacted. If you contact me, I will eventually be in touch with the parents. But I may be a good resource just to ask me, hey, what do you think about this? Here's what happened. I called 911. Do you want to call the parents? Do you want me to call the parents? So there are 3 parties that need to be contacted immediately. Secondly is that if a student is threatening to harm him or herself or to harm somebody else, the best thing you can do is actually keep that student from running away to go into that situation. So if we're hanging out in the barn and it's youth group, it's Wednesday night, it's Sunday morning, whatever it is, and a student expresses something about going somewhere to do some sort of harm, keeping them within the group is probably, within the barn setting is a good thing. Now, you obviously have to be aware. If a student says, I have a knife on me and I just want to use it on somebody, okay, now we're in a major crisis situation. That is pretty rare, but if something like that happens, we don't want that person to be around a ton of students. But in general, if a student says, hey, I'm going to go hurt myself, you want to keep that student connected to you until we get parents, myself, emergency authorities involved in that situation. I realize there's a bit of nuance there. It's not kind of black and white, but in general, immediate crisis situation, we have to contact 911, and if you can keep them from running off, particularly if they're talking about suicide, you can keep them around you or around, our group, we can deal with that situation better. So, contacting people immediately. If a student shares with you and says, I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anybody, do you promise you won't tell? The best thing to say is, no, I can't promise that. What you can promise is, I'm going to do the best thing for you, but to say I won't tell or I promise I won't tell really puts you and the student in a bad situation, because you're going to be betraying that student's trust right there, because you do have to tell. Legally, you are obligated to let some sort of authority know, and usually that happens. If you come and tell me, then I'll contact 911 or some sort of protective services to deal with these crisis situations. But do never promise total privacy to a student. Say I'm going to do the best thing for you, and I promise that I won't go spreading this around to everybody in the barn or all your friends at school, whatever it is, because you won't do that. But to give a total, across the board promise of privacy is not a good decision to make. Another great situation, or another great way to handle that type of situation, is to put that responsibility on me, on Tim. So say, hey, look, I promise I'm not going to run around and tell a bunch of people, but Tim is my, my quote-unquote boss here at the barn, and so I need to tell him what's going on. So put that on me, and then I can contact whoever needs to be contacted. Then you maintain the relationship because you've told the student who you're going to talk to, and then beyond that, I'll be the one who contacts all the other parties that need to be involved. if there's no immediate danger, you want to contact me and let me know what's happening, and then also I will let you know kind of how you might be involved in the future. So if a student admits to you that he or she, say, is cutting, and you contact me and say, hey, this is what happened, this is what I found out. So as I start the process of trying to help connect the student to get resources, talk to the parents, whatever it might be, you may have a role to be involved, maybe share with me, share with the parents or authorities, depending on what's happening. And then just to be able to walk with the student through the healing process of all these things. Another key thing as far as action steps, communicating honestly with me about how you are feeling. So if you're going, this is just way above my pay grade, I can't emotionally deal with this, then let's get you out of that situation, and we will make sure that we have plenty of people to take care of it. But if it's overwhelming for you, there's no reason for you to stay in that situation. Now, a lot of people can have that sense of like, well, I got to stay in here, it's for the kids. But if you're feeling completely swamped and overwhelmed by these things, then there's no point in you being involved, because you're not going to be able to give anything to those situations. And that's true across the board. I mean, most people who are psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, they actually go and talk to other psychologists or social workers, psychiatrists, to kind of get some of this stuff that's been thrown on them and piled on them. Even though it's a professional setting, it still does weigh them down, and so they want to get that word out to, or get that those feelings out to other people. So it's a very natural thing to sometimes go, this is beyond me, I can't deal with it, I got to pass it on to somebody else. If you're feeling overwhelmed, let me know and we'll make sure to deal with that. Listening is so much, it's a huge part of what actually happens in these crisis situations. A student comes up and shares with you, just listen, just ask good questions. We don't need to correct and direct and say, that's dumb, why would you do that, that's a dumb choice. Just listen and encourage and say, wow, it sounds like you're having a really hard time. It sounds like things are really tough. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, what are some ways that you think I might be able to help you? As you could say that to a student. So listening, that's really a huge portion of what we as leaders do, just to help students kind of get into a place where they can process, talk, and then we can get them connected to people who can really help them. And the last thing is that once we're in the process of dealing with a crisis situation, it's to follow up with that student. So if we have a student who, say, has talked about harming him or herself, and we care for that student, we reach out to that student, and we've had this happen in the past. We had a student who was institutionalized because of concerns with self-harm, and we had several leaders reach out to and go and visit that student. And that means so much, just to say, hey, no one's quitting on you, we're still here with you. Now, it doesn't mean that every leader has to go visit every student, but if you've been involved with the student, you know the student, to reach out and follow up is a great thing to do. I want to say, bottom line, in all these situations, the best thing you can do, the best resource, is to come to me. And it's not because I know everything or I have all the answers, but it takes the responsibility off your shoulders completely, and then it puts me in a situation where I have access to the people who have answers. So if you have any questions in these types of crisis situations, come to me, we'll talk, and we'll move forward from there. A couple of just other notes I wanted to share. First is that we need to be aware that these types of situations, unfortunately, they happen all across the board, all socioeconomic statuses, rich people, poor people, white people, black people. It doesn't matter what it is. These types of crisis situations happen across the board. So just be aware. You might hear things from a student and go, it could never happen in that household. But stay aware. And it's best to say, hey, Tim, I heard this said, and maybe it's nothing, but I'd like to at least share it with you. And then we can be aware and follow up if we need to. Second thing is it's important not to single out a student in public. If you want to talk with a student or they've shared with you, a great thing to do is to go and say, hey, can we just talk for a minute, and go grab a couch or, in the barn while people are mingling around. You could stand out on the ramp and talk. You could go, somewhere where you have you're clearly trying to have a conversation with the student. I wouldn't take that student and leave the building completely and go to a totally different place. But to say to the student, hey, let's talk about this. We don't want to do that in a public setting because that could be very embarrassing for the student. Again, showing concern and listening, not necessarily a hope to correct or fix the behavior or fix the feelings. In particular with feelings, we can affirm feelings even if the feelings are connected to something that is maybe not totally true. So if I'm supposed to show up to a meeting and I don't show up and you're really mad at me, and then when I show up I say, well, the reason I'm late is because I got in a car accident and I had to help somebody out because their car was on fire, your feelings prior to me showing up were probably frustration and anger because I was going to be late, right? But when I showed up, all of a sudden you see, okay, my feelings weren't rooted in the total truth. But that doesn't mean your feelings weren't real. You were really feeling frustration. You were really feeling Why is he late? I don't know why he's late. So in the same way, if a student says life is hopeless, I can't understand why I should go on living, or I can't stand my parents, I don't want to talk to them. It's really easy for us to go, hey, well, don't say that. You need to respect your parents. But to affirm the feeling, say, it sounds like you're really feeling frustrated. Let's talk about that a little bit. You're not affirming necessarily the behaviors or affirming that everything is totally true that the student is saying, but the feelings are still a really real thing for each of us. So just to affirm, I hear what you're saying and I want to hear more about what you're talking about. And the last thing is that these types of situations, the change is usually long-term. That means that we're not going to say one thing and it's going to fix them immediately. So that's why we deal with mental health professionals, doctors who can offer medication in some situations. These are not quick fix situations. So in light of that, remember, take this long-term approach. We don't want to just say, oh, it's hopeless, there's nothing we can do in the next 2 days, so forget it. We want to take that long-term approach to really care for kids. Now, again, the reason I brought this topic up is because we're dealing with a crisis situation right now with a student dying at a local high school. Again, there are questions about what the cause of death was, but I even heard from a mom today who told me about this mom's child was kind of in denial about this could never happen, and this kid was not the mom's kid who I talked to, but the student who passed away, for example. This student that we know, that we have connected to our ministry, was saying, this kid who died, it couldn't happen. He was so happy, he was so positive, and he's in this place where he's really struggling with it. Man, the best thing we can do is just say, hey, man, I hear you're having a really hard time, or if the student opens up with us, listen, care for them, love them. There's a great passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 where Paul basically says, with the comfort we've been given from God, now we're called to go and give that comfort to other people. God uses us as his hands and feet. We get to be the heart and the hands of Christ, I think, in these types of situations. So we just get to love on and encourage people who are going through really tough times. So at the end of it all, some of maybe the three key things I would say is, one, be aware. Be aware of what's happening with students. Listen to what they're saying. Look for certain behaviors that might be concerning. Number two is to pass any of that information or responsibility on to me. As much as you might need to deal with something immediately and make sure that it gets passed on to me, I can pass it on to Dirk, to Bruce, to the other people at the church, and then also, get folks involved, professionals who can help us. And then number three is, you're not doing this alone, as far as you're not just one individual. You've got a team of people that we're trying to work together to care for students. And certainly we're doing it with the power of God behind us. Doesn't mean that it always pans out perfectly or that it's always going to be easy, but God is there to walk with us through these challenging situations. So keep that in mind. If you have questions or comments, we're going to talk about this at the next ministry partner meeting, so please jot them down, and we'll talk soon. And thanks for watching the video, guys, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for your service with our students.